In the summer of 1941, a 22-year-old graduate student at Princeton named Richard Feynman walked into the university library and asked a question that the physicians treating his fiancée had apparently stopped asking. Arline Greenbaum had been sick for months. The diagnoses had moved through typhoid fever, glandular fever, and several iterations of lymphatic cancer. None of them had produced a correct treatment, because none of them had been correct. Feynman found the entry in the medical reference: tuberculosis of the lymphatic glands. This is very easy to diagnose. He read the sentence and understood that if the physicians were still confused, they must think it was something worse. He then traced the logic backward from their uncertainty to the only diagnosis the evidence actually supported. Arline's county hospital chart at that same moment reportedly read, Hodgkin's disease. The question mark was there. The credential was there. The understanding was not. That question mark is the subject of this discussion. You have sat in that kind of room. Not necessarily a hospital room. It could have been a financial consultation, a legal briefing, a school meeting, any room where someone with a title arranged the furniture of authority before you arrived. And somewhere in the conversation, a drop occurred in your stomach that you could not name at the time. Not confusion exactly. Something more like the private alarm that fires when a confidence rises faster than the explanation underneath it. You left with an answer. The answer may even have been correct, but the next question, the one you should have asked, the one that was already forming when the conversation ended, that question never got asked because the room was not configured for it. Feynman's story is about what happens when someone finally says the question out loud. There is a clinical term for what happened to Arline's physicians. It is called premature closure. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality defines it precisely. The diagnosis is accepted before it has been fully verified. Or, in the version that appeared in their patient safety literature, when the diagnosis is made, the thinking stops. The name arrives, the chart fills, and the next fact that enters the room, a test result that does not fit, a symptom that has not resolved, a patient who is not improving, enters after the furniture has already been arranged. Feynman's father, Melville, was a uniform salesman who spent his son's childhood taking him on walks through the woods of Long Island. He had a habit. When Richard pointed to a bird and asked what it was called, Melville would name it in several languages and then tell him, "You now know what people call this bird in English, in Portuguese, in Chinese. You do not yet know anything about the bird." That distinction between the name and the mechanism, between the label and the causal chain underneath the label, became the organizing reflex of Feynman's intellectual life. He carried it into the Princeton Library in 1941. He carried it into Arline's hospital room. He carried it onto the stage at Caltech in 1974. He carried it onto the Rogers Commission in 1986, where he sat with a piece of O-ring rubber and a glass of ice water, and demonstrated publicly what management confidence had obscured: that a material fails predictably below a certain temperature, and that the decision to launch the Challenger had been made by people who had stopped asking whether the model fit the world. The Challenger discussion already showed what happens when management confidence rises above engineering reality. The fracture line is always the same one. Different institution, same gap. At Princeton in the spring of 1941, Feynman went to the library not because he expected to outdiagnose the physicians. He went because he could not tolerate a label without a mechanism. He read the lymphatic disease classifications of the era: lymphodenema, lymphodenoma, Hodgkin's disease, and found something that any trained engineer would have noticed immediately. The classification was circular. It named outcomes rather than causes. If the patient survived for some period, the condition was recorded one way. If the patient died, another. The taxonomy was a filing system, not an explanation. He kept reading. He found the tuberculosis entry. This is very easy to diagnose. He did not conclude he was a physician. He concluded that the physicians treating Arline were not reasoning at a level he could not also reach with a library card and a willingness to follow the evidence wherever it went. He asked Arline's doctor about the Widal test, the blood agglutination assay for typhoid fever, the standard diagnostic marker of the era, developed by Georges Fernand Widal in 1896. The test had come back negative. Feynman asked the obvious question: if the diagnostic test is negative, why does the diagnosis remain? The physician had no answer that addressed the contradiction. Arline's parents were summoned. They told Feynman not to interfere. The typhoid diagnosis continued. The confidence continued. The question mark remained invisible in the room, even as it was being written into the chart with the next diagnosis. Now think about what Ashley Meyer and colleagues at Baylor College of Medicine found when they ran a diagnostic vignette study in 2013, published in JAMA Internal Medicine. They recruited 118 U.S. general internists. They gave them 4 previously validated diagnostic cases, 2 easier, 2 more difficult. On easier cases, physician accuracy was 55.3%. On difficult cases, it fell to 5.8%. Confidence, across those same cases, averaged 7.2 out of 10 on easier vignettes and 6.4 on harder ones. 5.8% accuracy, 6.4 confidence. Those two numbers sat 1.6 apart on a 10-point scale, while accuracy sat 60 points below its supposed level. The clinically dangerous finding was not the accuracy number. It was what followed from the confidence number. Higher physician confidence was associated with fewer requests for additional diagnostic tests. Confidence did not merely fail to track truth, it actively reduced curiosity. Pat Crosscarry and Jeff Norman had already named this mechanism in the American Journal of Medicine in 2008. Overconfidence promotes premature closure, the moment the mind stops searching once a plausible label appears. A scoping review published in 2026 by Sriraj Iyer, Helen Hyam, and Nick Yoon at Oxford extended those findings across 77 studies and arrived at the same conclusion. Confidence and accuracy were not well calibrated, regardless of clinician experience level, and the decoupling changed downstream care, altering testing decisions, medication administration, and referral rates. The physician who walked out of Meyer's vignette study, confident in a diagnosis that was wrong in 94 cases out of 100, learned that confidence somewhere. Where the confidence gets built is upstream. A qualitative study of barriers to critical thinking in medical curricula, published in 2020, extracted 47 initial codes from interviews with medical students and faculty, organized them into 14 subcategories, 8 main classes, and 2 large structural themes: socio-cultural conditions and what the authors called a traditional and immutable system. The language the students used is worth sitting with. Linear thinking. Intellectual dogmatism, obedience in the system, lack of freedom to comment, absent questioning environments, routine evaluation with weak feedback, a clear and coherent framework that becomes a cage. These are not complaints about incompetent teachers. They are descriptions of a training structure that rewards efficient answer retrieval over honest uncertainty tolerance, that promotes the student who can reproduce the accepted map over the student who pauses and asks whether the map still touches the territory. David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger published their foundational study in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 1999. 4 groups of young adults tested on humor, logic, and grammar. Those scoring in the 12th percentile rated their own performance at the 62nd percentile on average, 50 points above their actual standing. Dunning's explanation was precise. The skills required to produce a correct answer are the same skills required to recognize what a correct answer looks like. When those skills are absent, both the performance and the self-monitoring fail simultaneously. The double burden. The mistake and the inability to detect a mistake arrive together. The expert version of this is more dangerous than the novice version because it is less visible. Dunning, now at the University of Michigan, has written about professionals who carry genuine competence in their primary domain and systematically import that confidence into adjacent domains that share only the surface features of their primary one. The cardiologist who has correctly read 10,000 electrocardiograms brings that confidence to a presentation where the ECG is normal and the disease is elsewhere in the chest. The form of the examination proceeds intact. The surface behaviors of expert diagnosis are fully present. And the disease sits in the part of the chest the expert has learned not to look at, because the instrument they trust is not showing it. The question is not whether the physician is competent. The question is whether the model still fits the world, or whether the world has been quietly replaced by the model. In June of 1974, Richard Feynman stood at the Caltech graduation and delivered a commencement address later published in Engineering and Science, Volume 37, Number 7, under the title Cargo Cult Science. He was 56 years old. He had won the Nobel Prize in Physics 9 years earlier, and he had finally found the image precise enough to name what he had been watching for 3 decades. During the Second World War, indigenous peoples in the South Pacific watched American military aircraft land on improvised airstrips and deliver quantities of manufactured goods they had never seen. When the war ended and the aircraft stopped coming, some communities built replicas. They constructed wooden control towers. They carved headphones from wood and sat wearing them inside those towers, watching the sky. They built mock runways and lit fires along both sides at night. They performed every observable surface behavior of an operational airstrip. The planes did not come. They had everything right except an understanding of the causal mechanism. Everything except the reason why the cargo had come in the first place. Feynman used that image to describe a failure he had been watching for decades, and then he stated his central principle. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. He was not describing fraud. He was describing the condition of a trained professional who has learned the surface of a domain, the runway, the tower, the headphones, without ever understanding the mechanism that makes it work. Scientific integrity, he said, requires leaning over backwards, reporting not only what supports your interpretation, but every fact that might make it invalid. All the details that could throw doubt on your theory. All the observations that disagree as well as those that agree. The replication crisis discussion showed how science keeps the ritual after it loses the self-suspicion. Ian Chalmers and Paul Blasio wrote in The Lancet in 2009 that approximately 85% of research investment was being avoidably wasted through poor design, wrong questions, non-publication, and biased reporting. Bielakova and Brownlee later put numbers on the wreckage. Approximately 1.5 million biomedical papers published annually, at least half potentially so poorly designed or reported that their results cannot be trusted. In 2012, a team associated with C. Gwen Begley at Amgen attempted to replicate 53 landmark preclinical cancer biology studies. 6 replicated. A 2016 Nature survey of 1,576 scientists found more than 70% had been unable to reproduce another scientist's experiments. More than 50% had been unable to reproduce their own. The wooden headphones are not limited to one hospital in Queens in 1941. They are institutional infrastructure. The diagnostic era discussion mapped the moment a provisional label hardens into charted certainty, the exact instant the model stops fitting the world and starts replacing it. The 2023 Johns Hopkins Group published in BMJ Quality and Safety an estimate built from nationally representative U.S. observational data on disease incidence for vascular events, infections, and cancers, combined with literature-based rates of diagnostic error and serious harm. Their result, approximately 795,000 Americans are permanently disabled or killed each year because dangerous diseases are misdiagnosed. Under more conservative modeling assumptions, the estimate sits near 549,000 serious harms annually. 5 diseases: stroke, sepsis, pneumonia, venous thromboembolism, and lung cancer account for 38.7% of all serious diagnostic harms. 15 diseases account for 50.7%. The limitation matters and should stay in the room. This is a modeled extrapolation, not a direct count. The causal chain from error to death involves multiple intervening factors. But the model is what allows the estimate to escape the single dramatic anecdote. The gap between knowing and understanding is not a literary complaint. It operates at scale. Watch a 4-year-old with a broken toy. They do not ask who the expert is. They turn the thing over. They push the part that moved last time and notice that it does not move now. They ask why it stopped. Michael Chouinard's 2007 monograph on children's question asking, drawing on transcript analysis, parent diaries, zoo observations, and a problem-solving study with 67 4-year-olds, found that children do not ask questions for attention. They ask targeted questions when they detect a gap, an ambiguity, or an inconsistency, and they keep asking when the adult fails to answer informatively. Sobel and Somerville showed in 2010 that 4-year-olds learned causal structure more accurately when allowed to discover it through their own action than when they observed someone else's action or merely confirmed a demonstration. The child curiosity discussion described how causal thinking begins as a why question long before it becomes a professional skill, and how the credential system trains it out. He never stopped asking what the mechanism was before he accepted what the name was. In the Princeton Library, he was not more intelligent than Arline's physicians. He was simply operating in a mode they had been trained away from. He had no diagnosis to protect. He had only the evidence and the willingness to let the evidence threaten his current best guess. The protocol is not confrontational. It happens before you leave the room, while the chart is still alive enough to change. Not, "Are you sure?" That invites status defense. Instead, 4 questions. What is the leading diagnosis right now? What else is still on the differential? What specific finding makes you most confident in that diagnosis? And what result, over the next test or the next week, would cause you to change your mind? If the answer to that 4th question is silence, you have found the location of the problem. Not necessarily an incompetent physician, the location of the dangerous gap. The place where the confidence has exceeded the evidence, where the model has stopped fitting the world and started replacing it. Write the answer in the parking lot. A provisional idea hardens inside memory faster than it hardens on the page. Use the protocol at the moments when drift is most likely. After a new diagnosis, after a treatment that is not working, after a normal test result that does not match the body's behavior, after an expert opinion delivered with unusual smoothness. The contraindication is obvious, not for stroke, myocardial infarction, sepsis, or respiratory failure. Stabilization first. This protocol is for the chronic room, the follow-up room, the room where the chart has been accumulating for months. In week 1, the question feels socially difficult. By week 4, you begin to hear the difference between an explanation and a recital. By week 8, you notice that certainty is very often a professional tone of voice, produced in the larynx rather than in the evidence. I have asked that 4th question in a hospital room, once, not as a confrontation, just as the next question. The physician paused and ordered a test he had not planned to order. The result changed the diagnosis. The 2015 National Academy's report estimated conservatively that diagnostic errors affect approximately 5% of U.S. adults seeking outpatient care each year, contribute to approximately 10% of patient deaths, and account for 6 to 17% of hospital adverse events. The 2023 Johns Hopkins estimate moves that into harder numbers. None of those estimates are about villains. They are about the condition Feynman spent his career describing sincere, trained, credentialed people who have learned the form and lost the mechanism, who carry the headphones and sit in the tower watching the sky, waiting for cargo that cannot come because the question that would summon it has not been asked. The county hospital chart read, Hodgkin's disease, question. The confidence was present. The credential was present. The question mark was already in the room, written in the official record by the physician who could not bring himself to say out loud what the punctuation was admitting. I do not know, and I am treating anyway, and the treatment is wrong, and I know it might be wrong, and I am going to keep treating. Arline Feynman died on June 16, 1945, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was 25. Streptomycin, the first effective antibiotic treatment for tuberculosis, completed its first major clinical trial in 1948, 3 years later. You are in rooms like that hospital every few years of your adult life. The question mark is somewhere in every one of them. Feynman's contribution was not genius. It was the refusal to pretend the question mark was not there. The question mark was already in the chart. Feynman just said it out loud.